You have no idea what you are doing near this engine. I fixed the fault code, sir. The readings are stable. Do not dare tell me how to run my show. Stop. That is what came out of Reed Hargrove's mouth, in front of 30 people, right in her face. Your jet has a cavitation fault, just a canvas bag and hands that have been inside engines. You go fix broken boats for refugees trying to sneak into America. The jet had been grounded for some time. Several engineers had already failed. $220 million were walking out the door. Reed had nobody left. 1 hour. Fail, and I will drag you out like the dog you are. She said nothing. She walked barefoot straight to the jet. That girl he called a monkey? She fixed it in under an hour. And Reed? He lost everything. Man, who is this girl? And how did she end up barefoot in a billion-dollar hangar? Novacrest Aerospace was not some garage startup. It was a $3 billion defense and aviation company headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. Glass towers, private hangars, a fleet of corporate jets lined up like trophies behind razor wire at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. And at the center of it all, one woman, Vivian Whitfield, CEO, former Air Force flight engineer, the kind of woman who did not raise her voice because she never had to. When Vivian spoke, rooms went quiet. When Vivian gave a deadline, people did not sleep until it was met. Her personal aircraft was a Gulfstream G650ER. $50 million of engineering perfection. Twin Rolls-Royce BR7 225 engines. A range that could cross oceans without stopping. It was not just a jet, it was Novacrest's reputation with wings. And for some time, it had been sitting dead in Hangar 4. The starboard engine had a problem nobody could name. During taxi tests, the thrust would surge without warning, then roll back on its own, like the engine was choking on something invisible. It never happened twice the same way. It never showed up on the static test stand inside the hangar. The diagnostic computer said everything was normal, but the engine kept failing. And here is why that mattered more than pride. Soon that jet was supposed to carry 4 Pentagon evaluators and Vivian herself to a classified facility in Nevada. Novacrest was competing for a $220 million defense contract. If that jet did not fly, the contract went to their biggest rival. Vivian sent one email to her entire engineering division. 6 words. Fix this jet or lose your jobs. She meant it. Reed Hargrove was vice president of engineering. Ivy League, custom suits, corner office with a view of the runway. He had been at Novacrest for years, and in that time, he had built himself a reputation. Not for brilliance, but for control. Nothing happened in that hangar without Reed's signature. Every diagnostic plan, every repair order, every outside consultant, all of it went through him. So when the jet broke, it was Reed's engineers who tried to fix it. And it was Reed who approved every single attempt. Several engineers had failed. Here is how it went. Rick Sattler went first, senior engineer with decades of experience. He pulled the full authority digital engine control unit, the FADEC, and replaced it with a factory new one straight from Rolls-Royce inventory. The engine surged again on the next taxi test. Same problem, no change. Dennis Cooper went second. Younger, sharp, hungry to prove himself. He spent time remapping the fuel flow calibration tables, ran simulations, told Reed he was confident. The engine choked at 60% thrust on the runway, worse than before. Phil Underwood went third. He swapped the engine-driven hydraulic pump, a complete dead end, time wasted. Scott Brennan went fourth. He ran a borescope inspection of the high-pressure turbine, threading a camera through the engine's guts, looking for cracks, erosion, foreign object damage. He found nothing. Absolutely clean. Jeff Lorraine went fifth, and Jeff's recommendation was the one that nearly got him fired on the spot. He told Vivian they should pull the entire engine off the wing and ship it to the Rolls-Royce Service Center in Indianapolis. Vivian stared at him for several seconds without blinking. Then she said, "Get out of my hangar." Several engineers had failed. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in parts, 0 answers. And every single failed diagnosis had one thing in common. Reed Hargrove signed off on all of them. The hangar smelled like jet fuel and cold coffee. Technicians snapped at each other. Tool carts sat half opened. Somebody had taped a sticky note to the engine cowling that read, "Good luck." It was not encouragement, it was sarcasm. Novacrest was on the verge of losing everything. And nobody in that building had a clue what was wrong. That same week, Nia Thornton stepped off a Greyhound bus in Charlotte with $38 in her pocket. She had come from Birmingham, Alabama. No job, no contacts, no plan except survival. She found a women's shelter in East Charlotte that had one open bed. She took it. The next morning, someone stole her boots, the only pair she owned. She looked under every cot, asked every woman in the shelter. Gone. So she walked out barefoot. She was not in Charlotte for Novacrest. She did not know what Novacrest was. She had seen a flyer at a laundromat, janitorial staff needed, with an address on West Boulevard. That was it. A cleaning job, minimum wage, a reason to keep going. The night before she went to apply, she stopped at a gas station on Freedom Drive. Two men in Novacrest work shirts were standing by the coffee machine, talking loud enough for the whole store to hear. The engine keeps surging and rolling back during taxi, but the test stand shows clean every time. Nia stood behind the chip rack listening. She did not move for some time. She had heard this before. Not these words exactly, but the pattern, the description. An engine that misbehaves on the ground, but behaves on the stand. Intermittent surges that no diagnostic computer can catch. She had seen it in diesel generators, in marine engines, in old military surplus turbines in her grandfather's scrapyard. She knew what it sounded like. The next morning, she walked to the Novacrest campus on foot. Several miles, no shoes, she carried everything she owned in a single canvas duffel bag, a hand-drawn notebook of engine schematics, 3 socket wrenches her grandfather had given her, and a worn Bible with her grandmother's handwriting in the margins. She came for the janitorial job. She walked through the employee entrance, filled out half the application with a borrowed pen, and then she saw it. Through the glass wall at the end of the corridor, Hangar 4, the jet, the open engine cowling, the flood of halogen light, and she heard it. The engine was running on a test cycle. She was far away, separated by glass and concrete, but she tilted her head, closed her eyes, and listened. Her lips moved. She whispered something to herself that nobody else could hear. Then she put down the pen, walked to the hangar reception desk, and said the words that would change her life. "I think I know what is wrong with that engine." The receptionist looked at her bare feet, looked at her bag, picked up the phone, and called Reed Hargrove. He arrived in moments. He took one look at Nia, her feet, her clothes, her bag, and his face twisted like he had smelled something rotten. He did not ask her name, did not ask what she knew, did not ask a single question. He turned to the 2 nearest security guards and said, "Who let this in?" That was the moment from the beginning of this story. The moment 30 people watched and said nothing. The moment Reed called her a monkey. The moment security grabbed her arms and walked her toward the exit. But here is the detail nobody noticed. As they pulled her through the corridor, Nia turned her head one last time toward the glass wall. She pressed her palm flat against it, held it there for several seconds, staring at the jet. She was not looking at the aircraft. She was listening to it. And what she heard, what no engineer, no computer, no diagnostic tool in that entire hangar had caught, would turn out to be worth $220 million. If you are already hooked, hit subscribe right now, because this story is just getting started. And what Nia does next will leave you speechless. To understand what Nia Thornton heard through that glass wall, you have to understand where she came from. Not Charlotte, not any city. Nia grew up on the edge of a scrapyard in rural Alabama, miles outside Birmingham. No streetlights, no neighbors close enough to wave at. Just a dirt road, a rusted trailer, and acres of dead machines piled up like metal bones under the sun. That scrapyard belonged to her grandfather, Roy Thornton. Roy spent decades in the Birmingham steel mills pouring iron, welding beams, breathing air that turned his lungs into sandpaper. When the mill started closing, he took his pension, what little there was, and bought a piece of land nobody wanted. He filled it with the things other people threw away: diesel engines, tractor transmissions, old military surplus generators, church vans with blown head gaskets, farm equipment so rusted you could not tell what it used to be. Most people saw junk. Roy saw a classroom. Nia was young the first time Roy put a wrench in her hand. By the time she was older, she could name every part of a small block engine by touch. She could disassemble a Cummins diesel injector pump faster than most certified mechanics. She rebuilt a scrapped Ford inline 6 from memory. Roy described the assembly sequence once, and she did it without looking at a manual. Once. That is all she needed. But here's the thing that made Nia different from every engineer in that Novacrest hangar. When Roy was older, a welding arc exploded inches from his face. He lost most of the vision in his right eye. After that, he could not do close work anymore, could not read gauges, could not see hairline cracks or microfractures, so Nia became his eyes. Roy would sit on an overturned bucket, a cigarette between his fingers, and describe a problem out loud. There is a knock in the second cylinder. Probably a wrist pin, but listen first. Do not look. Listen. Nia would close her eyes, press her palm against the engine block, and feel the vibrations travel through the metal into her bones. She would tilt her head and separate every sound. The intake, the compression, the exhaust, the way a musician separates instruments in an orchestra, then she would open her eyes and find it. Every time. Roy taught her a method. 4 steps, always in order. Listen first. Look second. Touch third. Decide last. Most mechanics do it backward. They see a problem, guess a cause, and start replacing parts. Roy called that throwing money at metal. He said the machine will always tell you what is wrong if you shut up long enough to hear it. Nia lived by that method the way other people live by prayer. The neighbors figured it out eventually. Word spread through the county the way it does in small towns, slowly, then all at once. People started showing up at Roy's scrapyard with broken things. A generator that would not start. A school bus transmission grinding in third gear. A church van leaking oil from somewhere nobody could find. Naya fixed them all. She was young, lying on her back in Alabama dirt, hands black with grease, pulling apart machines that grown men had given up on. She was never paid. Not once. Roy would not allow it. The work is the receipt, he told her. People remember who kept the lights on. Nia's grandmother, Miriam, died when Nia was young. Cancer that nobody caught in time because the nearest hospital was far away and they had no insurance. Before she died, Miriam underlined a passage in the family Bible and wrote 7 words in the margin with a ballpoint pen. Steady hands, quiet mouth, let the work talk. Nia read those words every night for years. She read them the night before she got on that Greyhound to Charlotte. She read them the morning her boots were stolen. She read them the night after Reed Hargrove called her a monkey in front of 30 people. Steady hands, quiet mouth, let the work talk. That was Nia Thornton's operating system. She did not argue. She did not prove herself with words. She did not beg for respect. She proved herself by doing. When the county condemned Roy's scrapyard for unpaid property taxes, Nia lost the only home she had ever known. Roy's health was failing. His pension was gone. There was no safety net, no savings account, no relative with a spare room. Nia had no high school diploma. She dropped out to care for Roy full time. No certifications, no references that any employer would take seriously. She heard Charlotte had jobs. She scraped together $38, packed her duffel bag, and got on a bus. She was not heading to Nova Crest to prove anything. She was not chasing glory. She was trying to survive. The jet, the $50 million engine, the barefoot walk across that hangar floor, none of it was part of any plan. It was an accident of proximity and a gift of instinct sharpened over a lifetime of listening to machines that nobody else cared about. The morning after Nia was dragged out of that hangar, Nova Crest made a phone call they had been avoiding. They called Warren Callahan. Warren Callahan was older, retired, bad knee, walked with a cane he had carved himself from a piece of Tennessee hickory. He wore rumpled blazers and shoes that had not been polished in years. But in the world of aerospace propulsion, Warren Callahan was a living god. Decades at Pratt & Whitney, lead engineer on major military turbofan programs, holder of multiple patents, the man who diagnosed critical issues on high-profile engines. When Warren Callahan spoke about jet engines, people did not take notes. They recorded every word. Nova Crest had been avoiding him because Warren was not cheap, and because Warren did not care about politics, chain of command, or anyone's feelings. He arrived at Hangar 4 one morning, white hair uncombed, cane tapping on the polished concrete, a paper cup of gas station coffee in his free hand. Reed Hargrove met him at the door with a handshake and a binder full of diagnostic reports. Warren took the binder, did not shake the hand. He spent time reading every report, every test result, every parts order, every sign-off sheet. He asked questions that made the engineers squirm, not because the questions were complicated, but because the answers exposed how little they had actually investigated. Did anyone examine the fuel oil heat exchanger? Silence. Did anyone run the taxi test in lower ambient temperatures? Silence. Did anyone in this room actually listen to the engine with their own ears instead of staring at a screen? More silence. Warren set the binder down on a tool cart and looked at Reed Hargrove. You have been treating symptoms. Nobody in this hangar has diagnosed the disease. Reed's neck turned red, but he said nothing, because Warren Callahan was the one person in that building he could not overrule. That same morning, Nia Thornton came back to Nova Crest. Not to the hangar. She was not crazy. She went to the janitorial office on the east side of the building to finish her cleaning job application. She sat in the plastic chair in a hallway that smelled like floor polish and old vending machine coffee. She filled out the form with the same borrowed pen from the day before. While she waited, she noticed something. The hallway shared a ventilation duct with Hangar 4, and through that duct, faint, barely there, buried under the hum of fluorescent lights, she could hear the engine running on a test cycle. Nia closed her eyes. She tilted her head the way she had done 1,000 times in her grandfather's scrapyard. Chin slightly raised, breathing slow, filtering every sound until only the engine remained. She sat like that for some time, perfectly still, eyes shut, barefoot heels pressed together on the cold tile. A janitorial supervisor walked past, looked at her, and almost told her to leave. But before he could speak, someone else stopped in the hallway. Warren Callahan, on his way to the restroom, cane in one hand, empty coffee cup in the other. He saw Nia and froze. Not because of her bare feet, not because of her clothes, he froze because of the way she was sitting. The tilted head, the closed eyes, the absolute stillness of someone who was not sleeping, not resting, not waiting, but listening. Warren had seen that posture before in his long career. He stood there watching her. Then he spoke. What are you hearing? Nia's eyes snapped open. She looked up at this older white man with a cane and a rumpled blazer, and for a moment she said nothing. She had learned what happened when she spoke up in this building. But something in Warren's face was different. He was not looking at her feet. He was not looking at her clothes. He was looking at her ears. There is a hesitation in the spool up, she said. The high-pressure turbine is hitting a resonance it should not. It sounds like a bearing cage, but it is not. It is upstream. Something in the fuel oil heat exchanger is cavitating under load. Warren did not move for several seconds. Then he said two words. Come with me. When Warren Callahan walked Nia Thornton into Hangar 4, the room went dead quiet. Every engineer, every technician, every security guard who had dragged her out the day before, all of them staring. Reed Hargrove saw her first. His face went from confusion to fury in under a second. Absolutely not. She has no credentials, no clearance, no authorization. She does not even have shoes. She has ears, Warren said. That is more than anyone in this hangar has shown me. This is a liability nightmare. Insurance, FAA regulations. If something happens to that engine? Warren ignored him. He pulled out his phone and called Vivian Whitfield directly. Vivian arrived soon after. She walked into the hangar the way a general walks onto a battlefield. Slow, deliberate, already angry before anyone spoke. She looked at Nia, looked at Warren. You vouch for her? I vouch for her ears. That is more than I can say for any pair of eyes in this hangar right now. Vivian stared at Nia for a long time. Then she made a decision that would change everything. 1 hour, under Callahan supervision. Identify the root cause. Not fix it, just find it. If you can do that, we will talk. If you cannot, you walk out and you do not come back. Reed stepped forward. Vivian, this is insane. She's a nobody off the street. She has no... Vivian did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Your engineers have had their chance. She gets 1 hour. The hangar went silent. The kind of silence that has weight. Somebody handed Nia a pair of borrowed work boots, 2 sizes too big. She laced them tight and tucked the extra space with a rag from a nearby tool cart. They gave her a visitor lanyard. White badge, red letters, escorted access only. She clipped it to her shirt and looked at the jet. 30 people stood watching. Several engineers who had failed. A vice president who wanted her gone. A CEO who was giving her one shot. And an older legend who had bet his reputation on a girl he had known for less than some time. No safety net, no second chance, no room for error. If she failed, she proved every word Reed had said about her. She would go back to the shelter with nothing. Just another barefoot girl who did not belong. If she succeeded, she would do what several credentialed engineers could not do in all that time. The clock started. 1 hour. Nia Thornton did not rush. She stood several feet from the jet for the first few minutes, just looking. Not at the engine, at the whole aircraft. The way it sat on the hangar floor, the angle of the cowling, the position of the ground support equipment around it. Then she turned to the nearest technician. Start the starboard engine. Idle only. The technician looked at Warren. Warren nodded. The engine spooled up, a low whine that climbed into a smooth, steady roar. To everyone in that hangar, it sounded normal, clean, healthy. Nia closed her eyes. She stood there, borrowed boots too big, visitor badge crooked on her shirt. And she listened the way her grandfather had taught her. Not to the overall sound, to the layers inside it. The intake, the compressor stages, the combustion cycle, the turbine, the exhaust. Each one a voice in a choir. Each one supposed to be in harmony. She raised her right hand, advanced to 60% N1 slowly. The technician pushed the throttle forward. The pitch of the engine climbed. At a certain point, Nia's hand snapped into a fist. There. She opened her eyes. Did you hear that? Nobody answered. Rick Sattler shook his head. Dennis Cooper shrugged. Reed crossed his arms and stared at the ceiling. Play it back in your heads, Nia said. At that specific percentage, the high-pressure spool hesitates for a fraction of a second. It is not a mechanical knock. It is not a compressor stall. It is a fluid dynamic interruption. Something is disturbing the fuel flow right before the combustion chamber, but only at that specific RPM band and only under thermal load. Warren Callahan was leaning on his cane near the tool cart. He had not said a word since the engine started, but now he straightened up. Run it again. They ran it again. This time Warren closed his eyes too. At that point his chin dipped once. A single nod. She is right. It is there. Reed uncrossed his arms. That is not possible. The vibration analysis software monitors every frequency band in real time. If there was an anomaly, the system would have flagged it. Nia looked at him for the first time since she had walked in. Your software filters frequencies below a threshold to reduce noise in the data. That hesitation lives right under the cutoff. The computer threw it away. My ears did not. Silence. Some time had passed. Nia asked the technicians to shut down the engine and let it cool. While they waited, she sat on a rolling stool next to the engine nacelle, pulled her canvas bag onto her lap, and took out a hand-drawn notebook. The pages were soft from years of use, every page covered in pencil sketches, engine cross-sections, fuel system diagrams, valve assemblies, not textbook drawings, self-taught drawings, the kind made by someone who learned by taking things apart and putting them back together countless times. She flipped to a page near the back and ran her finger along a sketch of a fuel oil heat exchanger. I need access to the FOHE, starboard engine. Phil Underwood spoke up for the first time. The fuel oil heat exchanger, every diagnostic code on that component is green. It passed inspection. It passed your inspection, Nia said. That does not mean it passed mine. Later, the engine had cooled enough to work on. A technician removed the access panel to the FOHE, a metal box roughly the size of a small suitcase, bolted deep inside the engine's fuel delivery system. Nia did not use a flashlight. She did not use a gauge. She did not use a scope. She used her hands. She ran her fingertips along the outer casing of the heat exchanger, starting at the outlet and moving slowly, centimeter by centimeter, toward the inlet. Her eyes were half closed. Her breathing was slow and even. Her fingers moved the way a blind person reads Braille, light, precise, patient. Everyone watched. Nobody breathed. At the inlet side, her fingers stopped. Here. She pressed her fingertip against a spot on the casing and held it there. There is a micro deformation right here. The metal is bulging outward by less than 1/3 of a millimeter. You cannot see it, but you can feel it. Warren stepped forward. He ran his own finger over the same spot. His eyebrows rose. I will be damned. Dennis Cooper came next. He felt it too. His face went pale. We never even opened this panel, he said quietly. Nia explained it without raising her voice. This deformation is a manufacturing defect. It's shipped from the factory like this. Under normal conditions, it does not matter. But when this heat exchanger reaches operating temperature, the metal expands. That tiny bulge becomes just large enough to create a restriction in the fuel inlet flow. That restriction causes cavitation, micro vapor bubbles forming in the fuel line. Those bubbles collapse when they hit the combustion chamber, and that is what causes your thrust disruption. Reed's voice cut in from behind. Tight, controlled, barely holding. You are telling me a dent smaller than a fingernail took down a $50 million engine? I am telling you a defect. Your ultrasonic testing equipment could not detect took down a $50 million engine because your equipment has a resolution threshold. This deformation sits below it. More time had passed. Nia asked for a whiteboard. Someone rolled one over from the engineering office. It was large, still covered in old diagnostic notes. Nia erased it with her forearm in one long sweep. Then she picked up a black marker and started drawing from memory. No notebook, no reference, no manual. She drew the complete fuel system schematic for the Rolls-Royce BR725 engine. Every fuel line, every valve, every junction, every sensor point, every bypass loop. The drawing covered the entire board, clean, labeled, and precise. The hangar was dead silent. Even Reed had stopped talking. Then she picked up a red marker and traced the fault cascade. It starts here. She circled the FOHE inlet. Deformed casing. Under cooler ambient conditions, the fuel enters the heat exchanger cold. As the engine reaches operating temperature, the differential between the cold fuel and the hot casing triggers thermal expansion in the deformed area. She drew a red arrow downstream. The expansion creates a partial restriction. Fuel pressure drops just enough to cause cavitation. Vapor bubbles forming in the fuel line before the combustion chamber. Another red arrow. Those bubbles reach the fuel nozzles. They disrupt the spray pattern. The combustion becomes uneven. The high-pressure turbine spool feels it as an asymmetric load. That is the hesitation I heard. Another red arrow. The FADEC detects the thrust anomaly and tries to compensate by adjusting the fuel trim. But it is compensating for a symptom, not a cause. So it overcompensates. That is your uncommanded thrust rollback. She capped the red marker and turned around. And here is why your engineers could not reproduce it on the test stand. She pointed at the board. Your static test stand is inside this hangar, climate controlled. At that constant temperature, the thermal differential is not large enough to trigger the expansion. The deformation stays dormant. The engine runs clean. Every time. She let that sink in. But outside, on the taxiway, in cooler morning air, the differential is large enough. The expansion crosses the threshold, and the engine chokes. She put the marker down. That is why it only fails during outdoor taxi tests. That is why it never shows up on your diagnostics. And that is why several engineers could not find it. They were testing in the wrong environment, looking at the wrong component, and trusting software that was filtering out the one frequency that mattered. Warren Callahan stood up from his chair, slowly leaning on his cane. He walked to the whiteboard and studied the schematic for a long time. Then he turned to face the room. That is the cleanest fault analysis I have seen in decades. He was not smiling. He did not need to. The weight of what he said landed on every person in that hangar like a hammer. Nia Thornton had just done in under an hour what several of Nova Crest's best engineers could not do over all that time. She did not celebrate. She did not look at Reed. She put the marker down, stepped back from the whiteboard, and stood with her hands at her sides. Steady hands, quiet mouth. Let the work talk. Vivian Whitfield did not wait. She picked up her phone, called the Rolls-Royce Regional Parts Depot in Atlanta, and ordered a replacement fuel oil heat exchanger for the BR725. Priority shipment. No discussion on cost. How fast can you get it here? Soon. A courier van, door to door. Vivian hung up and looked at Warren. When the part arrives, she installs it. Reed stepped forward. Vivian, you cannot let an uncertified civilian replace a flight critical component on a $50 million aircraft. FAA regulations allow supervised work under a certified technician's authority. Warren did not even turn around. I hold an inspection authorization. She works under my sign-off. It is legal. It is documented. It is done. Reed opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He stood there like a man watching his own house burn from across the street. Later, a white courier van pulled into the Nova Crest service bay. Inside a foam-lined crate, one factory new fuel oil heat exchanger, serial number verified. Paperwork signed. Nia carried it to the engine herself. She did not ask for help. 2 Nova Crest technicians flanked her, not because she needed them, but because procedure required it. Warren stood nearby, leaning on his cane, watching every move. Nia removed the damaged FOHE with a precision that made the room go still. Her hands moved the way a surgeon's hands move. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no second guessing. She loosened each bolt in sequence, not the sequence in the maintenance manual. A better sequence, one that reduced stress on the surrounding fuel lines and prevented micro leaks at the gasket seals. Warren noticed. He said nothing, but he noticed. The old unit came out. Nia held it up to the light and ran her thumb across the inlet deformation one last time. That tiny bulge, invisible to the eye, undetectable by ultrasonic equipment, had grounded a $50 million jet and nearly cost Nova Crest a $220 million contract. She set it on the tool cart like evidence at a crime scene. The new unit went in, torque wrench clicking in steady rhythm, fuel line connection sealed and pressure tested, electrical harness reconnected. Every step documented, every step witnessed. The hangar smelled like fresh lubricant and cold metal. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the background, a technician's radio played low static. Nobody talked. The only sounds were Nia's tools and her breathing. She finished. Ready for test, she said. The starboard engine spooled up. Idle. 20% N1, 40%, 50, 55, 58. No hesitation, no surge, no rollback. The thrust climbed smooth and clean through the entire operating range like a blade cutting silk. They ran it several more times. Perfect every time. Warren called for the real test. The next morning, cooler air on the taxiway, the exact conditions that had caused every previous failure. Nia stood on the tarmac in her borrowed boots, arms crossed, watching the jet roll forward under its own power. Dawn was just breaking over the Charlotte skyline. The engine spooled up, full taxi power. Clean, smooth, flawless, no surge, no rollback, no hesitation, nothing. The jet was alive again. The tarmac erupted. Technicians clapped. Ground crew whistled. Dennis Cooper walked straight to Nia and shook her hand with both of his. Rick Sattler stood back, arms folded, but he nodded once. Slow. The nod of a man who knows he just watched something he will never forget. Warren Callahan placed his hand on Nia's shoulder, gently, the way a grandfather would. He leaned close enough that only she could hear. Your grandfather taught you well. Nia looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but she did not cry. She had been holding herself together for too long to let go now. She looked down at her borrowed boots and said the only thing that was true. I just did not want to go back to the shelter tonight. Warren's hand tightened on her shoulder. He did not let go for a long time. Then Vivian Whitfield walked across the tarmac. She did not smile. Vivian never smiled, but she extended her hand, palm open, steady, waiting. What is your name? In all that time, through several engineers, 2 security removals, and 1 public humiliation, not a single person at Nova Crest had asked Nia Thornton her name until now. Nia Thornton, ma'am. Vivian held her hand and looked her in the eyes. Nia, that jet flies to Nevada soon. You are going to make sure it stays airworthy. We will discuss terms in my office. If this story just gave you chills, you are not alone. Drop a comment right now and tell me about a time someone underestimated you. Hit subscribe because stories like Nia's remind us what people are really made of. Disgusting. They called her a monkey, a stray, an animal, and she was the one who saved their $50 million jet. Imagine that was you. Would you still have walked back into that hangar? Sometime after that taxi test, Nia Thornton sat in Vivian Whitfield's corner office on an upper floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the runway where the jet had just come back to life. Nia was still wearing the borrowed boots, still wearing the visitor badge, still carrying the canvas duffel bag she had walked in with. Vivian sat across from her and slid a folder across the desk. This is not a janitorial contract. It was an offer letter. Special technical consultant, Nova Crest Aerospace, reporting directly to Warren Callahan for a mentorship assignment on the Pentagon Defense Contract Project. Salary, benefits, full medical, company housing, a furnished one-bedroom apartment near the campus, and one more line at the bottom. Full sponsorship for a GED completion program and FAA airframe and power plant certification through an accredited program in Charlotte. Nia read it twice. Her hands did not shake, but her jaw tightened the way it does when someone is trying very hard not to fall apart. I have one condition, she said. Vivian raised an eyebrow. My grandfather, Roy Thornton, he is in Birmingham. His health is failing and he cannot afford proper care. I need to bring him here. Vivian did not hesitate. Done. We will arrange transport and connect him with our corporate medical provider this week. Nia signed the offer letter with the same borrowed pen she had used on the janitorial application. That afternoon, Warren Callahan did something he had not done in years. He sat down and wrote a formal engineering report, not for NovaCrest, but for SAE International, the global authority on aerospace and automotive engineering standards. The report detailed the diagnostic methodology Nia had used: acoustic detection, tactile inspection, and thermal differential fault analysis. He listed Nia Thornton as co-author, first name on the paper. The report circulated through the aerospace maintenance community. Nia did not become famous. She did not go viral. She did not end up on talk shows. But in the rooms that mattered, the hangars, the repair stations, the engineering labs, people started saying her name, the barefoot girl who heard what the computers could not. Soon after, Vivian Whitfield's Gulfstream G65DER flew to Nevada right on schedule. The Pentagon evaluators never knew how close they came to never boarding that jet. Nova Crest secured the $220 million defense contract. While Nia Thornton was rebuilding her life, the system was catching up with Reed Hargrove. It started quietly, the way these things always do. Vivian Whitfield called an internal review of the engineering division's diagnostic protocols. On the surface, it was routine, a post-incident audit, standard procedure after a grounded aircraft, nothing personal. But Vivian was not looking at procedures. She was looking at patterns. The review team pulled records from recent years. Every diagnostic sign-off, every external consultant engagement, every hiring recommendation, and every rejection that passed through Reed Hargrove's desk. What they found made Vivian close her office door and call outside legal counsel. In recent years, Reed had blocked, reassigned, or terminated several external consultants and contract technicians. All of them were people of color. Each time, Reed used the same language in his paperwork. Credential concerns, not a cultural fit, insufficient institutional alignment. Clean words. Professional words, the kind of words that do not trigger alarms in an HR system designed to look the other way. But lined up in a row, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Two of those consultants had filed formal complaints with NovaCrest's HR department. Both complaints were reviewed. Both were closed, insufficient evidence to proceed. The HR manager who closed both cases reported directly to Reed Hargrove. When Vivian read that line in the report, she did not slam her fist on the desk. She did not shout. She picked up the phone, called NovaCrest's outside counsel, and said 4 words. I want him out. But Vivian was a systems thinker. She did not just want Reed gone, she wanted to make sure the next Reed could not happen. The following period, Reed Hargrove was placed on administrative leave. His engineering approvals were revoked. His building access was suspended. His files were transferred to outside counsel for a full civil rights compliance review. There was no press conference, no public shaming, no viral moment. Just a man in an expensive suit standing in a parking garage, holding a cardboard box of personal belongings, watching his keycard bounce off the security scanner with a red light and a short beep. The same sound Nia heard when security dragged her toward the exit. The same short beep. Reed Hargrove was not destroyed. He was not arrested. He was not humiliated in front of 30 people the way he had humiliated Nia. He was simply and professionally held accountable. For a man who had spent years building his identity on institutional power, that was worse than any public spectacle. The system he had weaponized against others had finally turned around and looked him in the eye. Sometime later, Vivian signed a company-wide policy change. Effective immediately, all walk-in applicants and external technical consultants would undergo an anonymous skills assessment. No names, no photos, no background information, just a test of what you could do. Credentials would be reviewed separately after capability was demonstrated, not before. The internal memo named the policy the Thornton Protocol. Nia did not ask for it. She did not know about it until Warren told her over coffee in the campus break room. She looked at the memo for a long time, then folded it and put it in her canvas bag next to her grandmother's Bible. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The work had already talked. Months later, Nia Thornton sat at a workstation in Hangar 4. Steel-toed boots she bought with her own paycheck. A Nova Crest badge with her name on it, not a visitor pass. On her desk, the worn Bible open to Miriam's handwriting. Next to it, an FAA certification study guide, half finished, covered in pencil notes. Her grandfather, Roy, was in a rehab facility minutes from her apartment, getting stronger every week. He had called her that morning and said, "You kept the lights on, baby girl." Every Saturday, Nia drove to the same shelter where someone stole her boots. She taught engine repair to young women who reminded her of herself. No credentials required, just steady hands and a willingness to listen. She was not famous. She was not rich. She was building. Sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one nobody invited. Unbelievable. Imagine you standing barefoot, being called a monkey in front of 30 people. What would you do? Like and share if this made you angry. Subscribe for more.